We have got three pretty awesome people who are going to kick around this little intellectual football for the next 57.5 minutes. Please welcome to the stage. She's a professor of psychology from the University of Sydney, Sally Andrews. He's written lots of books. He wrote one book a couple of years ago that people really thought was awesome. Richard Flanagan. This next guy, I was going to call a novelist, I was going to call a polemicist, I was going to call an artist. Been hanging out with him backstage. I'm just going to call him a dude. Douglas Coupland, ladies and gentlemen. Now, just before we kick off our discussion, I'm going to embarrass one of our panellists a little bit. A fascinating conversation you had with Richard Glover yesterday where you explained that you've actually moved on to new things, written a couple of books since the big moment. But I'm sure for a lot of people here in this room, it's the first time they've seen you since the prize was announced. You don't have to be part of this if you don't want to. But when I count to three, if you would like to just give this man an indication of your reaction when you heard the big news that he'd won the Booker Prize, I'm sure he'd be fascinated to know. So, 1, 2, 3, Booker Prize winner.
Yeah!
Oh! Just quickly on that topic, seriously, when you found out, did you go, come on?
No, I stood up and I was shaking all over, and I knew I had about 5 seconds to get up there and grasp Camilla for some solidity, and I just knew I had to get to the stage and not shake, and I did. When I got there, I felt ready for it. That was it.
And it was very well earned.
And I was completely wrong.
So what we're going to do, roughly, look, today's conversation in honour of the internet age is going to start off a little bit structured, then we're just going to get distracted and bored and confused and run down rabbit holes and click on links and all that. But vaguely, I want to examine three concepts with you guys. In this internet age, how do we work? How do we read/think? And how do we socialise? We'll then take some questions from the audience and see how we're going. How do we work? Start for me. What's your earliest internet memory? What's your give me something you can remember from interacting with the ancient net, and tell me something you've done in the last couple of weeks that would have blown your mind of 10 years ago that now is just commonplace, typical. Sally, take me back in your net history.
I think my first internet memory is from 1989, in fact, when the RNet, the university-wide network, was first established, and I was attempting to organise a sabbatical, my first sabbatical, and I'd sent all of these letters off into the distance in order to attempt to organise this, and waited months and months for them to come back, and there was one person whom I hadn't managed to tee up a meeting with at the University of San Diego, and I discovered that there was this internet thing, and found her email address and emailed her, again with this, dear Professor Koutras, could I please come here at this long-winded thing, and got back a response saying, OK, MK. I mean, which not only introduced me to the internet, but also introduced me to the impact on language that it was going to have. I've noticed your emails, Adam, don't involve a single uppercase letter.
Shift key, so overrated for mine. Give me something you've done recently in your academic or general life that...
Oh, well, everything's changed so much. I mean, I suppose one that I'm very aware of at the moment is that I've got thousands of students, many student reports to mark, and that's a completely different business these days. I mean, now we have to worry so much about all the plagiarism that students will engage in by virtue of all of the sources that they have access to, and we do all of it online. I have to spend hours toiling over the internet in order to mark them. I mean, it's a very different business trying to sort of work out how it is that you best encourage students to think in this age.
Take us back, early net memory for you.
Oh, that would have been fall 1988, and... Oh, sorry. Trump, okay. And we used it just within the office, and then we used it overlinked to the other office across town, and then it just sort of crept up on me. And then I was working at Wired magazine in '93, and I remember Kevin, who's one of the editors, there's no place to go on this thing. Like, you called the information superhighway back then. Like, oh, well, look at this. And he pulls up a black and white map of clouds off the coast of Northwest California. And look at that. Like, what is it? It's like, it's a weather map. Okay. But every 6 hours, it changes, updates. And so cut to actually yesterday, I did a video conference in the hotel room, wireless, with London and 2 offices in Paris, and we were designing robots using the screen. It's like, okay, this thing actually has a trajectory. It was quite wonderful.
Internet, Tasmania, late 80s?
2080s.
What's your early memory of interacting?
It crept up. I remember I was shooting a film in '96, and the production people coming down from Melbourne wanted to have email in the production office in Hobart. And I said, what do you do with email? But they said, well, we send jokes to each other. And in the event, there was no ISP they could connect up with, although the original internet protocol for connecting up email servers was actually invented by a Tasmanian in Hobart, and that served for from the mid-90s through to the early 2000s.
There you go.
Yeah, the most recent thing, Monday night I had a Tasmanian TV crew in my study in Hobart, and my eye line was to an iPad gaffer tape next to the camera where there was a BBC interviewer interviewing me from London. And this is such a straightforward thing, and yet it's so remarkable. And what I've seen in my writing life is that power's completely leached away from the old centres like New York, like Europe, and it becomes possible for a person like me to write from what was once seen as the edges of the earth. I was in New York 2 weeks ago at a writers' conference called Voices from the Edge, but no one there felt that they came from the edge. And at the centre, there didn't seem to be a lot, you know? So there's a massive leaching away of power because of the net in culture.
Do you write by hand? It was fascinating. You had an amazing chat with Richard Glover yesterday here at the festival, talking about the road and the book, and saying that it was actually like the 4th or 5th version you'd done, and not as in tweaked it a bit, like 4 or 5 times went, no, that has to die, get rid of it, and started completely anew. Give us an insight into that process in the digital age. And do you still write by hand or on computer? Do you save things? And how's that impacted the act of writing?
Well, my first book I wrote when I was 21, I'm 53 now, that was all written by longhand, and all the correspondence, phone calls even to the publisher in Melbourne were expensive, so everything was done by handwritten letters. Back when they'd type letters and I'd handwrite them, and that was the process of editing. With this novel, I did write five different novels, and I did destroy each one. The manuscript, I handwrite on anything that's at hand, beer coasters, lolly papers, the actual manuscript itself I transcribe onto a laptop, and then I print out, and then I work over that again. So it's perhaps like someone my age, a melding of both.
I find, Sal, that if I write something by hand, if it's a speech I've got to give or something, and it's fairly thrown together at the last second, but if I write it by hand, I feel that I remember it better than if I've typed it.
You do.
Do I?
Yes. Now,
why?
Well, first of all, there's research showing that, that compared students writing notes on laptops versus handwritten notes. And the laptop notes are much longer, they're much more veridical, a reproduction of what's in the lecture, but their memory of what's in the lecture is substantially poorer than the students who handwrite it, even if they get to look at the notes again. And I guess in my view, it's because handwriting, that we construct thoughts. There's mental effort involved in putting together thoughts. We can only actually hold 3 or 4 thoughts in our mind at any one time. And if they...
On a good day.
Oh, yes, that's right, indeed, the best of us. And the handwriting process requires that construction. I think it's probably also the perceptuo-motor aspects, the actual kinesthetic
Because you're telling yourself to write
Yeah.
the word fish. I don't feel that I'm telling myself, hit the F button, hit the I button, hit the S button.
Yes.
There's more of a commanding myself to do it.
Yes, I think, and also I think that it means that there's more multimodal neural activity that then cements this and consolidates this more effectively than if it had just washed over you, or if you just automatically transcribed from the lecturer, into your keyboard.
Do you even own a pen?
I have beautiful handwriting, but I only do it about 3 times a year. I find I'm just basically lazy. If I write something, I only want to write it once. So you make a note, fish. If I do it, if I write it in cursive, I'll forget it. But if I do it in printing, I will come back and remember that note. And I think that anyone here who's ever used a highlighter pen, which is just, it's more like, this is what I'm never going to look at ever again. And sort of like industrialized amnesia, sort of.
Or people who have the regime of highlighter, so I'll go through, and the green highlighter is the first thing. The purple, if I put the purple over the green, that's really important. If I use the blue, that stuff I probably won't go, but what's going on there?
I don't know. I mean, I think, when you have so much information thrown at you, your brain just, it knows in a way better than you what you're probably going to need in the end. It might be just that simple.
You have coined the phrase fortility in Age of Earthquakes. It's a melding of forty and futility. In the future, a culturally mandated 40-hour working week may well seem as odd and cruel as 7-year-old children working in Victorian cotton mills.
Yeah, well, free time's maybe overrated. I remember back in the late 70s when the Iranians were having the hostage crisis, and my mom looks at the Koreans and says, "Don't they have jobs?" And just think, if you had all these people who are inside online, and suddenly they're just out, you take away the internet, and they're just out in the world wrecking things, and it's probably better for the planet that everyone's inside just like tethered to one spot. It's probably an ecological, wonder, is the internet.
Do you agree? Suck more people online to just because idle hands are the devil's work?
Alex talking to you.
Who are you talking to me?
Yeah, you. Do you just need, when you're in that beautiful Tasmanian wilderness, do you just need to get into your house, put on some vision goggles and play war games?
No.
But it's an interesting concept because
Look, I think things are choices. I'm fascinated by the work people like Sally do on neuroplasticity. But I think, what's happening certainly in America and Britain and Europe that I'm hearing through booksellers, publishers and so on, is that people are turning away from the devices. They're going back into bookshops. More bookshops are opening. E-book sales have plateaued for the moment at about 25% because there is something in the physical object that people find easier to comprehend. People recognise that screens have virtues that print doesn't, but they also reckon that they also recognise that the old print form actually has virtues that haven't been able to be replicated, and it's about comprehension.
I'm going to talk about how we read in a second. Just one quick question to you, but on that connectivity that Douglas is talking about, so when you were writing in a remote part of Tasmania in the past, if you wanted to write for 4 days, you could, and unless you chose to go to the post box and be interrupted by mail or a phone call. But these days, in this constant connectivity, is it hard for you to find several hours to just throw yourself at a single task? A lot of people complain they can't get work done because of the constant distraction of being permanently connected and interruptible.
The paradox of what I do is that I have a perfect internet connection, which is a very bad mobile phone modem. So it's just good enough to get emails and send emails. If you really need to search something, you will, but it's too slow and hopeless to stay on the net.
Couldn't download a cat video if your life depended on it.
No, that's right. But the paradox is I'm able to live and work where I am because communications now enable a writer like me who once upon a time would have gone probably not even to Sydney or Melbourne, but to London or New York or one of the centres. Now you're meeting people like this everywhere. I was talking to Mohsen Hamid here the other night. He's living in Lahore. He doesn't feel any distance between him and what's going on in world literature. And that's made possible by the communication. So on the one hand, people see it as crippling in some ways with the distraction. But on the other hand, it's a force for liberation because it allows you to live where you want and not actually have to go to the centres of power. And at the centres of power, there's a loss of their cultural import.
On the topic of how we do actually read, because you've done work on the way reading off paper compared to reading off screens or devices that might think they're helping you read better. Put briefly, what do we know about the way we read and take in information?
Well, learning to read requires very different processes than learning to understand speech. And so that, we think of spoken and written language as being essentially interchangeable, but there's lots of evidence that learning to read requires new cognitive insights on it required them on the part of our species. It was only about 5,000 years ago that we managed to develop that way of representing language, and children need to acquire new cognitive insights as well in order to be able to learn to read. And they're related to symbolic processing, realising that things stand for things rather than are the things themselves. Very young children, spoken words mean what they are. If you tell a young child, a 3-year-old child, that dog is called cat, and ask them what will it say, it'll say if it's called cat, it'll say meow. Right? And so that abstraction, that ability to recognise that things are symbols, is part of what's required to learn to read. And I think that's what we will gradually lose if we lose sophisticated written language processing, if we all do just this fragmented stuff that the web encompasses.
And also, from what I just quickly, when you're reading and your eyes are darting around and moving across the page, that's quite different to if a device is prompting the text through your line of sight, isn't it?
Yes, well, so there's these new applications like Spritz that present just one word at a time and that are argued to make reading so much easier because you don't need to move your eyes. Right? Is in fact the
I always used to find that whole moving the eyes thing was just so demanding with reading.
Absolutely, that's right.
Suck. And you've got a wonky eye like me. How do you think I got this, Doug? Just from reading.
Yes.
Sorry.
But in fact, while we're fixating on one word, we're taking in information that's coming up, and that's allowing us to retrieve information that will help us to be able to understand it. We're engaging in a whole complex of complex processes that we have no conscious awareness of at all, and that are specifically driven by this textual input, and aren't required in this one word at a time. The comprehension process that you were talking about require this, linking information together. There's only 3 things at a time, and we're just not capable of doing it at these very fast rates. Even we get this illusion of having understood what's happened, but in fact we haven't pulled it together or stored it away.
There's actually studies, aren't there, Sally, showing that if you get people to read novels or serious non-fiction on a screen and then compare their comprehension from a physical book, their comprehension's much higher from the book, isn't it?
I must admit I'm not aware of evidence showing exactly that, but certainly
Yes.
I think that if it was systematically investigated, you'd be able to show that. Yes, that we're using. You tend to know where you saw something on a page. There's actually a whole number of layers of information that we're simultaneously using.
Because you can if you've read a book and you try and remember, that character's name. Well, it was on the left and on the top half of the page.
Yes.
I remember that. You lose that with screens, don't you?
Absolutely, yeah.
And another paradox is that the nature of people's reading on screens is now affecting prose style. I think English prose style has changed more in the last 10 years than it has in the last century. So you're seeing much...
WTF?
OMG, I'm afraid.
What do you mean? Prose itself is changing?
Absolutely. You compare, say a Ford Madox Ford novel from the 1920s to, say, an Ian McEwan early 1990s. It's a very similar prose style, but books from the 1990s now already look slightly starch and awkward compared to the new tone of English language writing. We've had quite a stable written language for about 200 years, and it's now in rapid flux. You're getting shorter paragraphs, shorter sentences. You've got increasing absence of verbs. You have like a celebrated book like Amy McBride's recent book looks like a currant bun. There are that many full stops, like single word sentences. So you're getting amazing quick changes in the nature of prose, but it's becoming alive in the same way that the penny post, when that took off in the early 19th century, led to a great change of prose style then, and things became at once more conversational, but also more interested in the psychology of human beings in the way that letter writing...
Is it better or worse, or is it just different?
Well, I think that aspect of the net's been a very positive one, because we now live in a hyper-literate age, much more than what it was 10 years ago, because everyone's texting, everyone's emailing, everyone's posting things on social media, and you get people who wouldn't see themselves as literate, but write quite beautiful, cogent, and insightful text. So I think in many ways that aspect of it has been a gift.
Your stuff exists in many different forms.
Well, I was just going to elaborate on what he was saying, which is I think the best prose in the English language being written right now is one-star hotel reviews on TripAdvisor.com. But because you're not allowed to swear, and you've definitely got the emotion, and you're just sharpening the knives, and you go in and you write. And it's kind of amazing. I do think, yeah, the average quality of writing everything's risen with the tide. People write a lot more naturally now than they ever used to. I know that for sure. I mean, I remember in the 70s, like you type out in a paper, like suddenly you became Edwardian in the way it was just ridiculous. And
You would leave your real life to go and write for a while and then come back.
I mean, I don't know about these emojis. I mean, they're, on the other hand, if you go, there's this, you know what an emoji is? It's those little,
We've got politicians now aping them.
Our foreign minister on a breakfast TV show answered a question by giving an emoji of just... It was very funny moment. It was quite good.
there is, if you go online, the emoji tracker, and it shows you which are the most popular emojis on Earth, and they're always shifting, and it has an epilepsy warning on the page, which is kind of cool. But what would it be like a hypothetical story written 80 years from now, entirely in emojis? Is that possible, or that's...
I've seen people write things of, they've captured the process of researching, discovering and applying for a grant as a series of emojis, and it takes you through the excitement, the wonderment, the apply for the grant, get rejected, sad face, etc. Can I ask you, but there was a fascinating conversation that you and Norman Doidge, there was only a couple of seconds of, did we see Doug on our Q&A during the week? How awesome was Q&A without politicians? No disrespect to them. It's just this mind dump. There was one, and it's so frustrating because it could have gone on for longer. There was just one really small exchange that didn't get fleshed out that I'd love to quickly. You talked about people sometimes say, that's it, I'm going on holiday, no devices, nothing, I'm just going to purge. And you say within about 4 days, they go insane. And Norman said, no, that's them going sane. You could have done a whole Q&A on that. I loved that. Are you going insane or going sane as you try and digitally detox?
Okay, this is why I come to writers' festivals, because I get to talk with like globally respected neuro
Scientists.
Neuropsychologist, neurosurgeon dudes.
neuro person. And I was just like, okay, people are always talking about our brains are changing. Like, finally, like Norman and you guys didn't meet, did you? Well, that would have been like a super group. That would have been like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. I mean, I want to know, okay, is it true? Are our brains, are they radically changing, or just little tiny dendrites being tweaked here and there? Or what's going on in our heads? Because I know there's something going on.
I mean, everything that is going on in our heads is changing it. The way in which neuroplasticity is the stuff of knowledge. It's the reorganisation of those connections, the strengthening of different things. Reading has changed our brains so that it's only in the last couple of 100 years, as we were saying, that literacy has become a relatively universal phenomenon, and there is evidence that the visual cortex has been restructured to create a specialised little section for written words in the same way as there's a specialised section for faces. And so yes, it's in constant flux. But then there are also these more major changes happening as a function of the what we get exposed to, as a function of the medium in which we get exposed to thought.
Do you feel that your brain is different to your pre-internet brain?
I used to say I miss my pre-internet brain, and now I'm starting to forget what it was like, actually. I was in Brussels once, and I had to get a piece done. I was on deadline, and I did it on my laptop. I'll use the business center, sir. Great. So I go in there, and it's a Benelux keyboard, and it was like having a stroke. It was just, and it was actually worse than having, I had to handwrite it in Pax6. I couldn't do that. And then about 4.5 years ago, I got an iPhone, and began using it, and an iPhone's like, it's thumbs only, really. And then I'm a two-finger typist as well. I can't do that. I hunt and peck. And then after about a year, I started making all these weird spelling mistakes when I was writing on the keyboard. And then I thought, like, is this like flowers for Algernon? Am I completely... And then I realized, no, what's happened is you've been using typing like this for 30 years probably, if not more. And so your thumbs do this and your fingers do that. And then you go on an iPhone where you've completely reversed the order of the two. And so it's probably a very, very specific chunk of real estate back here somewhere. It's like, ah! Like, what are you doing? And it took me about 4 years to get back to the point where I can do work in different modalities.
Because they say even simple things like if you spend 2 weeks brushing your teeth with your left hand, if that's not your dominant hand, instead of right, even that, like a really basic concept, and your brain is suddenly just freaking out, going, if I want to do those teeth at the back, I should be...
It will claim to be the case that the motor areas that represent the thumb are substantially larger in teenagers.
It's been a great decade for your neuro-thumb area thing bits. You research, in putting a book together, you research. Now, these days, you would have access to material if you wanted to quickly check what was it really like in Melbourne in the 1850s, in a way that I presume in the past you would have had to order away or have a phone call or something. Do you feel that your brain is operating fundamentally differently when you do your work now to what it was 20, 30 years ago?
Well, two things. First, I'm rather lazy, and I just like making it up, and it's always a dreadful thing to admit. I did this talk with a famous nameless American author in Los Angeles in front of about 3,000 people who were there for the famous American, and they threw to her first and said, "How do you research?" And she would move into an area, she'd get volunteers, she'd set up databases, write software.
Immersive.
It was extraordinary. It was exhausting. It went for 15 minutes. It was a bit like Q&A. You wanted to, go to the toilet and come back. But anyway, finally she finished, and then he threw to me and he said, "How do you research?" I said, "Well, I'm Australian." I said, "We just make it up." And not one person laughed. I just wanted the San Andreas Fault to open up and swallow. But I mean, just think about all this. There's always a moral panic about new forms of communications. I mean, Sally was talking out the back about how Socrates famously was hostile to reading because he believed it would encourage forgetfulness. I've got a great quote here. "Thought will spread across the world with the rapidity of light, instantly conceived, instantly written, instantly understood. It will blanket the earth from one pole to the other, sudden, instantaneous, burning with the fervour of the soul from which it bursts forth. This will be the reign of the human world in all its plenitude. Thought will not have time to ripen, to accumulate into the form of the book. The book will be dead because it has arrived too late." Now that's written by a French poet, Alphonse de Lamartine, in 1831 about the new wonder of the time, newspapers. And television, there was a great moral panic about television, which went on for 30 years. Now the BBC is spending vast amounts of money trying to encourage young people to watch what they regard as a cultural treasure. And I think at the moment we're going through a sort of white sliced bread moment. It's like the 60s when everyone was so delighted with sliced bread, microwave meals and so on. About 20 years later, people realised it wasn't food. And I think there's all these marvellous things you can do with technology, and then I think there'll be a moment when people will realise that a lot of it's not really food, and they will choose to go to other forms that give them the substance that they get from forms like books.
I think that takes us nicely into our stuff on socialising that I want to ask. Just quick on the topic of great quotes. You tweeted the other day, before a dinner party, if you Googled someone, that used to be a bit stalky. Now it seems almost rude not to. Another quote, "For the first time in history, straight guys like Jay think they're having as much sex as gay guys were supposed to be having. On the internet, always assume the person on the other end is a 40-year-old ponytailed guy wearing a diaper." Our social life. Yeah. If people want to start moving towards the microphones, I'll take some audience questions about 5 minutes from now. Our social life, the way we interact now in this digital age, completely different to what even 10 years ago.
Okay, I want to do a quick crowdsourcing experiment using real people here. We did this the other night, and it sort of worked. How many people here tonight are a couple on an awkward first internet date? Okay. you imagine if they are on one, how awkward that is?
Yeah,
right
yeah,
now?
yeah.
Okay.
I love it when one person puts their hand up and the person next to them doesn't.
Okay, now, how many people here, if you're in a couple, are with your significant other, did you meet online? Okay, so that, I see about 20 hands. That means about 100 people in actuality.
Oh, okay.
Because no one ever likes to say they met online, but that's where everyone meets nowadays.
I was like a decade ago. I met my wife in 2003, and around that time, if you had friends who were dating online, that was a little bit. Gee, that's a bit weird. Felt to me like about 2006, 2007, it reached 50-50. Now I get the impression if you're single and not online, it's quite unusual not to have an presence.
I've missed the entire digital dating revolution. Yeah. And I just feel like a million years old when I look at,
Your profile would be awesome.
Well, we were talking in the green room about who's that cricket star?
Shane Warne.
Shane Warne, who he had a Tinder event and he thought that she wouldn't write about it. And of course, this first thing she goes off and does.
He was stunned. Shane Warne had a liaison on the dating site Tinder, and then the woman told her friends, and they told the papers, and it was all over the papers. And Shane Warne was begging for the nation's sympathy, going, I can't believe. I mean, I asked her beforehand. I said, you can't tell anyone about this. And I can't believe she broke that bond of trust. One, it's Tinder. Two, you're Shane Warne. When are you going to realise, Warnie, your life is different to other people's? You can't hook up with people online and expect that she's not going to compare notes with Liz Hurley or whatever. It's just the way it happens. Do you I'm not going to ask if you're on Tinder, but do you don't tweet much, do you?
No, I don't do any
Facebook?
No.
Instagram?
No.
None of that?
No.
Why not?
I can't be bothered. That's it. I mean, good luck to. I mean, it's sort of a bit boring.
In something like the academic community, however, like Facebook sites of common interest can be productive, can't they?
I gather so, yes. I'm with Richard on this one, I must say.
It's rare that in a group of four people, I'm the one at the forefront of Facebook, but I'm loving this.
I mean, I think people are the most interesting thing there possibly is, but I have absolutely no need to know what they're thinking at every moment of the day. You
had that great quote that you would, the internet's amazing, but you would never invite someone around your house and say, hey, let's go online together.
Would that just be strange? No, you would. It's fantastically solitary activity that has an amazing propensity to create new forms of groups and reinforce old pre-existing kinds of groups. And it's probably the biggest question of this century is going to be whether it ultimately favors the individual or whether it favors a group of some sort. And I'm from Canada. We're here in industrialized democracy. We're here in an industrialized democracy. We assume it's going to be the individual, but I think it's just that we're in a very, very privileged place to be. I think it could go the other way.
You have a Twitter, yeah?
Well, the terror to me that there's an apocalyptic moment coming when corporations and the state will be able to use this information against people in such draconian ways. I mean, you've got this new iWatch, which is sort of like a Pol Pot on your wrist, But it's
That's not the slogan they're going with.
yeah.
It's like wearing Pol Pot on my wrist.
But, you imagine, like 10 years' time, your health insurance company gives you the haptic tap because you haven't burnt enough kilojoules. But on the road bike, pump out 50K to keep your premiums down, you know? It's insane, They'll have sort of dog collars soon,
But you have a Twitter following. You have about 450,000 followers on Twitter. What is that community? What's your relationship to that? The overwhelming percentage of whom you will never meet. What is that thing, your Twitter following?
Well, in the old days, I would have said it was 450,000 people with too much free time on their hands. But we don't have free time anymore. We're always doing something, aren't we? So I don't know who these people are.
But what do you use that for? You put your thoughts out there? Are you harnessing their thoughts? Are you just letting off a bit of steam?
I only go there about once or twice a month. I used it in Paris. Had bronchitis, this is like 3 weeks ago, on it seemed an endless number of banking holidays they have in France. And the hospitals were literally like closed, like fermé. And what am I going to do? And I will call SOS Doctor. What's that? What do you call it? And it's the Uberization of medicine. It's like the doctor shows up in 15 minutes, like a real doctor, and they check you out, and then they apologize. I'm sorry, this is really expensive, but it's a banking holiday Monday. It's like, it's 65 euros. And then it was amazing. But I found out by going on Twitter and saying, I've got bronchitis, everything's closed, what do I do? It's like, oh, call SOS Doctor. So it comes very handy for things like that. or once my computer screen turned upside down, someone did it as a prank, and like, how the hell do I do it? Like, Twitter to the rescue. But then you look at something like the Arab Spring, and you've got, or Syria right now, where you've got far more complex and strange dynamics going on. And one moment it's the kids, and next moment it's the mullahs, and next it's these people. And I mean, what people with ISIS, for example, people talk about, you know, beheadings, et cetera, but they also say, like, you got to say they have really good production values. Like, it's not even Final Cut, it's Final Cut Pro that they're using, and that they have a logo, and the medium really is becoming the message in so many ways, but in fact, it's almost becoming the message of our times.
Move down to the microphones if there's questions you'd like to ask. The lights are quite bright in my eyes, so I can't see anyone at microphones at the moment. Wave your hands if you are at mics wanting to ask something. Excellent. Means more questions from me. Quick question about morality, right? It sucks that you have to wait 4 months before Foxtel will let you watch a TV show that they've watched in the States, and it's frustrating that it costs $60 a month, blah, blah. But piracy is clearly illegal, right? People do it. These days, if you say to someone, hey, I've worked out how to get behind the NYT paywall, if you go and view an item on Facebook and you can watch it all. Now, if 10 years ago you'd said, you know those newspapers, if you get up at 5 in the morning, you can just go to the newsagents and they're all just sitting out the front. You can take them. People would have said, that's clearly stealing. Is there something about this digital age that has changed people's relationship to what's fair and what's ethical and what is theft and what we have a right to?
One thing I've noticed, I'll be quick, is that there are people out there who hoard information just as much as like people hoard cats or, you know, garbage or trash in their houses, whatever. And they're like a special case. They take all this stuff. They never ever, even if they had 10 lifetimes, could never watch everything they have. I find that most people are actually pretty moral when it comes to, you know, iTunes. Like I pay for everything I get musically, books, etc. It was interesting you were talking about the Kindle, etc. And they were on the rise and on the rise. Then they plateaued, kind of like the way FM radio changed the AM radio universe. And then, yeah, it is actually going down a bit. It's kind of nice. And it's very, you can't, if you steal a book from a store, you get arrested, you get taken down to the jail or whatever. If you steal it online, it's like nothing at all. So, what am I saying? I'm just glad people are still buying books. If I was a musician, I'd be shitting my pants, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What would you like to ask, ma'am?
Thank you very much. I've had to write my question down because I think it's a bit complicated. I'm sorry about that. I was interested in what Professor Sally Andrews was saying about symbolic language. Thinking about how written language is symbolic and how the brain processes that. Where I live in the Hunter Valley, a local Aboriginal elder recently referred to the vast cultural library surrounding us, the rocks, the tracks, the trees, the rivers, the creatures, etc., which have both a reality and a symbolic meaning in traditional Aboriginal culture. So I just wondered what we know about how the brain processes that kind of language, which is both real in a 3D sense and symbolic at the same time. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Over to you, Sally.
Thank you.
It's the sort of question you're terrified of getting on a panel, isn't it? I love it.
Sorry about
Perhaps, I mean, this is coming at it from a different perspective, I guess. One of the ways in which people gain symbolic knowledge, gain symbolic processing capacity, apart from learning to read, is also by being exposed to more than one language. So just the fact, so bilinguals, there's lots of evidence, increasing evidence showing that bilinguals have stronger metacognitive processing capacities than people who are monolingual, and that indeed it preserves their cognitive processing into old age to a greater degree than it does for other people. Now, that's clearly a very different issue, but I guess it's just showing that symbolic processing can, as you're indicating, emerge from a whole variety of different aspects of ways in which we think about and process the world. So, yes, all of the different sorts of worldviews that we have through our religious views, or the cultural significance of the environment for Aboriginals, can also similarly create these layers of meaning which then enrich our cognitive processing in general. And I think that just the universality of a task like reading has given a much larger section of the population easy access to that sort of symbolic processing, which they might not have otherwise acquired through these other methods.
You both want to say something as well. Doug and Richard have said.
Richard, you go first.
What do you got there?
Oh, well, I think every culture is a way of defining the universe, and Australia is an extraordinarily fortunate country because we still have these traditional cultures, we still have scores of traditional Indigenous languages, and that is one way of defining the universe. The Western literary culture is another, net culture is one more, but I've never understood why the debate about Indigenous Australia is framed in terms of the past, when the possibility of reconciliation with Indigenous Australia offers, to my mind, such a glorious prospect for our future.
Doug? Yeah. He's not bad with words, this guy.
Yeah.
He goes all right.
It's this weird irony that for the first time in history, when you really don't actually need to learn a new language, if you don't want to, you can just have it auto-translated. Whatever it is we've done to our heads, it's made it much easier to learn foreign languages.
Really?
Yeah, and the way you teach online, you can just gobble up a language very quickly now. I'm doing it with French, and it's 1,000 times easier than it was Italian before.
Can I say, I've had this, there's a woman who's doing a PhD of all things on French translations of my novel, and she's...
Sacre bleu.
Yeah, well, exactly so, because she wrote to me in outrage because a character was described as looking like a brick shithouse, and which in French became a pissoir, which isn't a very manly idea, being described as a public urinal, is it?
That's great.
Yeah.
The other quick one with education I want to mention to people is that what you now have also in the field of, traditionally the teacher had to be in front of the class, you had to go to that university, sit in that place. The MOOC, the massive open online course now. So at the ANU, for example, there's a guy called Brian Schmidt. He won the Nobel Prize for Physics a few years ago for proving the universe is going to keep expanding forever, not collapse back on itself. And totally inverted thought at the time. You can do a MOOC that Brian and a colleague have put together. It's about a 3-hour per course, 3 hours per lesson, 9 lessons. It's about the sort of commitment you'd need if you were going to try and learn the piano or something. Runs 10 weeks. It's free. If you want a certificate to show you've done it, that costs $50. $50 to learn astrophysics from a Nobel Prize winner. I was doing a gig recently with the guy who's in charge of Google X Labs, and he did a course at Stanford University on creativity and design, and it was also available as a MOOC. There's 200 people at Stanford doing it who've paid tens of thousands of dollars. And there's people doing it online for $50. When they ranked the course at the end, the highest ranked student from Stanford came 421st. The top 420 students in this course were doing it online, juggling that either with full-time work or other studies, or they were 15-year-old girls from Kenya or something who were gaining access to information. That is something that learning process will revolutionise access and equity and the chance for people around the world to educate and change.
Can you imagine what sort of person would pay $50 for the certificate? And all they did was just turn the computer on and do something else, and then they came back.
Now, we've had a lot of people run now to the microphones, and I hate to not get there, but I don't know if we also keep the questions nice and tight. We'll keep the answers nice and tight, because there's one thing I want to ask you guys at the end. You, ma'am, fire away.
Okay, this is open to anyone on the panel or all of you. One of the revolutions that the net has brought about is engendering a way of marshalling more social action, and it's transformed the way that people can actually control the things that happen within their communities, within their country. I'd like to hear what you think about the projections of what that's actually going to be, because we've only just opened that particular area of power up, which completely returns power to the people.
Does it, Doug? Is power coming back to the people in this digital age?
Well, the way I look at it is you have young people, these millennials or what have you, and they're always being, they don't vote, they don't this, they don't that. I think young people today are more politically aware, and they're able to articulate their political points of view fairly better than any time in human history. I think what's maybe broken is the voting process itself. For example, people under 40 don't collect stamps anymore because they've never sent or received an actual letter. So why would they care about stamps? Like, okay, let me get this straight, says the millennial. You go to this, on one special day a year, you go to a ritualistic plywood booth where you're given like a graphite device where you, like what the hell is that? I mean, that's ridiculous.
Onto a piece of paper the size of a tablecloth.
It's just out of date and broken and is in need of fixing so very much. So I think that there is a disconnect between politicality and agency.
But just quickly, is the flip...
Well, I mean, that you cannot escape human nature. The net is Tahrir Square, which is extraordinary, but it is also ISIS, and it's also the NSA. And its potential for oppression is extraordinary. And once the Internet of Things take off, and we all live in houses, machines, places that can be remotely switched off and on, where we can be imprisoned, stopped, halted by things that are controlled elsewhere, when authorities elsewhere have full knowledge of everything about us and can use it against us at any moment, that becomes, to me, utterly terrifying. I remember reading an article about, in the dying days of Ceausescu's regime, how the Securitas were working on a phone that would be in every Romanian household that could, at any moment, be switched on so they could listen to a conversation in that house. I thought that was the most extraordinarily evil idea. Everyone in this room sitting with that phone in their pocket today, that phone can be switched on by secret police and listened to. So I do still have faith in the fact that people who fight for liberty, who fight for freedom, will use these forms for those things.
The other quick thing about that empowerment, there is empowerment, but at the same time, you can now in the online world, you can surround yourself totally by people who have exactly your position on something and convince yourself that your minority or objectively wrong position is right, because I can show you 200 articles by people who think that vaccination causes autism. How could there be 200 people who are all wrong? Well, that's because there's 7 billion minus 200 who realise that that's a complete crock. So that's something that can see that surrounding yourself and thinking that this small aspect of human belief is the whole world is dangerous.
That's right, and I think exacerbated further by the likelihood that we'll need to interact in the world less and less. As technology affords more and more ways of us carrying out our lives, then there'll be less need for us to bump into other people in the bus.
Up the top there, what do you want to ask, mate? Oh, yes, Richard.
Well, we shouldn't forget that it's also the Australian newspaper.
I'm not on the ABC anymore, am I? Shit, yeah, it is. Okay. Up there, what would you like to say, mate?
Yeah, I'm interested in the potential benefits and or detriments of the constant exposure to rapid information. So just like, for example, we know the physical body, people can train their body and it can be beneficial for your muscles and whatever, and you can also know that you can over-exercise or get injured. So that small tearing which builds muscle or large tearing that's actually an injury and it can lead to chronic injury. Is there any evidence, either positive or negative, that this exposure of our minds, which is similar, is having a beneficial effect, like growing our minds, or actually it's detrimental and damaging our minds?
Great question, because Kia from Port Macquarie remotely asked the same thing. A lot of cynicals say the new generation have vastly shorter attention spans, or perhaps they're just processing information faster. Have we looked at how the brain is taking stuff in, taking too much stuff in? Are we doing quicker? Is it still too early to have peer-reviewed research on that stuff?
No, I mean, I think the evidence that is available so far doesn't really suggest that we have got any better at putting the information together. Yes, all of this, we can take in this information at these very rapid rates, and now it's available to us in this multiplicity of different forms. And because we do have such efficiently organised neural systems, we understand that information straight away and have an illusion of having absorbed that point. But, I mean, I don't think there is. I mean, the evidence so far suggests that, yes, the more the more people's mind having this faster attention span is actually associated with less effective processing rather than more effective processing. The richer visual images and so on that are associated with all of our internet experiences don't enhance our understanding. They simply distract us from this constructive process that's required for the development of thought.
An IQ of 100 today would have been an IQ of 103 a few years ago, and maybe up to 115 several decades ago. But that's not just an internet thing, is it? That's the Flynn effect across populations and learning processes and everything. Is the internet making us smarter? You phrased the words Stuart, which means I'm actually very intelligent, but I don't have an internet connection at the moment, so I can't prove it. Yeah. Or Smupid, I'm aware of how much I don't know.
Well, I think people today are probably much smarter than they were 20 years ago. I'd say that the average IQ is now about 103. What we don't have now, there's that thing that used to happen at dinner parties where someone would be propagating what is obviously an urban legend, and you actually don't have any sort of proof to just say it's a crock. Now the iPad comes out.
You go to Snopes.
What was the name of that actress? And so people don't try and BS each other as much anymore. And I think I'm unsure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm certainly glad to be able to shut down that kind of urban legend. So.
What do you want to ask there, mate? Quickly.
Extension of the same question, really. Is there a way that we could design the internet or change things on the internet to actually benefit everyone better, benefit our brains and how we are able to use it? Do you think there's any way that we can do that, or?
Well, I mean, Alcatel-Lucent, I mean, the people don't think, the people who are developing these things aren't really concerned about attempting to do that, are they?
No, engineers are utterly uninterested in the intended or unintended side effects of what they create. It's just not that sort of thing.
That's a cheery notion.
Well, okay, here's my God-given chance to ask, do we really lose 10,000 brain cells a day? Or how many do we...
I don't know. I've not counted them myself.
Okay. Do we get fresh new ones every day, or...?
That's not my level.
I guess it's like mental gymnastics. There's a huge industry now. My next door neighbor up in Canada, she started this company where you walk in and it's like, develop your numerical skills, develop your whatever skills. And I'm not sure if it's a crock or not.
It is pretty much of a crock, I
Is
think
it?
the evidence
Okay.
is suggesting. I mean, there's more and more of these things, lumosities and so on and so forth, that we're all encouraged to practice, and lots of evidence that they make us better at doing those particular tasks, and doing Angry Birds or whatever it is, and very little evidence that they actually transfer to anything beyond that.
I'll take your question. It might be the last one. Apologies if you're up in the dark near a microphone. What would you like to ask, ma'am?
Just on a similar vein about the intelligence. And on the one side, I understood from yesterday, intelligence had increased largely because of the increase in literacy rates globally. But with the internet, and I think one of the points Richard made about it funneling down often highly censored paths, whether that is going to mean we have less expansionary mindsets, and also are we going to be as creative and therefore as able to make new innovations with the end? Will that be an aider, or will that go against us?
Creativity is part of your gig. Is the internet, are we more creative now? Are we more potentially creative now, or are we more narrow and siloed in the way we think and operate?
Part of your gig. That was just great.
I did see that the federal government's chief climate change advisor said that it was an invention of the United Nations, so it could take over world government.
One world government, Article 24. You with me, brother?
I think that proves we are more creative than ever, if not necessarily more intelligent.
Can I just quickly, I want to run one quote by you of yours that I just want to get to, then I've got a final question for you. You would tell a story in The Age of Earthquakes. In the 1990s, there was a 30-year-old guy who passed himself off as a hot teenage girl in a Florida high school and spent a year and a half before the authorities found out. Every so often, he pretended to have the flu, would go home and grow his beard, and then attend parent-teacher meetings as his own father. You finish the quote, I think that in certain ways, we've all become Latino guys pretending to be hot cheerleaders. Now, I was with you up to the parent-teacher meeting bit. What do you mean when you say, I think in certain ways we've all become Latino guys pretending to be hot cheerleaders, Doug?
I think we have a lot more freedom inside our head now. I think you can go places you've never been able to go before. You can, imagine. You may not be imaginative, but at least you have sort of the fuel to fire imagination if you have one. I noticed in high school when I grew up, you had jocks, you had cheerleaders, you had nerds, and that was it. And if you look at a high school right now, you can be anyone you want in school now, it seems. And there's this freedom of expression. And then you go someplace to Japan, where they went almost overnight from lifetime employment and salaryman conformity to this perpetual Halloween, where everyone basically wears a penguin costume to their job. And it's funny, tonight I'm going to dinner with Louise Aird, who actually footnoted in an article I wrote about how historically it's always been the rich or the outsider who's able to dress or be whoever they wanted to. And like, wow, it's really an honor to go to your dinner. And she's like, I don't remember writing that. And there is more freedom now than it certainly was when I remember growing up. And I think there's going to be a lot more.
Let me finish with one visual cue. I want to throw a slide up here that's going to usher in our final question. So this is a photo taken from the National Under-10 Chess Championships earlier this year. Girls Under-10 National Chess Championships. The girl on the right is my daughter, Ellie, and the girl opposite her is Jennifer the Juggernaut Zhang. Those two girls are the same age, mind you. And so Ellie won 3 games out of 3 on day 2, so into day 3 is going in, and we know she's going to be up against the Juggernaut. And my bit of advice to her beforehand was, look, this girl is clearly good. You have to be confident. You have to be strong. If you make a mistake, don't let her know that you realise you've made a mistake. Just have a look at the death stare Ellie is giving the Juggernaut. But what is awesome about that photo, if you know anything about chess, look at the board. Ellie's only made one move at this stage. She's made the standard opening move and just said, what have you got? Turns out the Juggernaut had a fair bit and Ellie lost. But I want to tell you quickly, we were down there driving, so it was in Canberra. We were staying at a friend of mine's house, borrowing her car, driving from Scullen to the city with us. And so my phone was showing the car where to go. And it just suddenly occurred to me that Ellie wasn't even impressed by that. I said, do you understand how it's happening? And she said, yeah, well, your phone's talking to a satellite that's talking to the base station, plotting where you are, going back to the satellite, coming down to the phone, going through the app, and the voice is telling us where to go. Oh. She's a bit of a nerd.
Wonder where she got that from.
But but that didn't even impress her. So I always say to people, when you're trying to predict the technologies that is coming, don't make the mistake of looking through your own eyes, because my mind's already blown. 15 years from now, we will have technology that blows her mind, and she's not impressed by a phone that can guide a car. Well, so in closing, can you all just give me a wild guess, something 10, 15, 20 years in the future, what's going to be happening in the digital world that would blow our mind today to think that it could happen? Could be a good or a bad thing, but tell me something. Have a look in the future and have a guess. I'll finish with you, Doug.
Okay.
I'm finishing with you, big guy. Sally,
well, I guess
have a punt.
It's not really quite a response to that, but rather it's sort of what I fear is likely to happen across the next couple of decades. I don't know whether any of you saw the movie Her, where it was effectively a post-literate world where books were still valued. I mean, people, they had museum bookstores, and Joaquin Phoenix wrote letters for people to, in fact, of course, he dictated them into a computer and they got printed out in lovely script, but people still valued it, but they walked around listening to their phones all the time. Everything was spoken language. And my view is that that's going to result in this, it's breadth versus depth. I mean, that we're processing more and more shallowly, and I fear that will reduce our capacity for depth of processing.
Richard, have a punt. 10, 15, 20 years from now.
Well, maybe picking up from what Sally says, someone will do the most revolutionary thing of it all and seek to write something out of their own soul on a piece of paper with a pen off the grid.
You never know, could happen. What do you think?
Well, I tried it myself, and there's a new system. When you write, the brain creates a signal that goes down to here, but they figured out a way of making it go backwards. So through the technology, which I won't describe, it has you writing Chinese, even though you can't write Chinese. And it's happening very, very quickly. It's like voice recognition in the 70s. And so you're actually going to be able to perform astonishing things with your hands with your eyes closed. And it's happening. And it'll probably be available commercially in 8, 9, 10 years.
In a word that I think summarises both your answer to that question and the entire last hour, wow. Give them a round of applause, please. Sally Andrews, Richard Flanagan, Douglas Coupland. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.